The Admiral's laughter cut through the hangar like shrapnel, mocking the call sign that had made enemy combatants whisper prayers into the Syrian night, until the single father standing before her spoke two words that turned her blood to ice. Operation Silent Thunder. If that opening gave you chills, don't miss what happens next. Subscribe and stay locked in. The thing about military ceremonies, Jake Morrison had learned over 15 years of service, was that they were designed to make you feel simultaneously invisible and overexposed, like standing naked in a spotlight while everyone pretended not to see you. This particular ceremony, his promotion to lieutenant commander, was checking both boxes with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Naval Air Station Oceana's Hangar 7 stretched out before him like a cathedral dedicated to the gods of aviation and bureaucracy. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting that particular shade of institutional white that made everyone look either dead or deeply hungover. The polished concrete floor reflected the rows of folding chairs filled with personnel from his squadron, most of whom would rather be literally anywhere else on this humid Virginia afternoon. Jake couldn't blame them. He'd rather be anywhere else too. But the Navy, in its infinite wisdom, had decided that his promotion required a full ceremonial production, complete with an audience, a flag officer, and enough pomp and circumstance to make a royal wedding look understated. Jake had requested, practically begged, for a simple ceremony in his commanding officer's office. Sign the papers, shake some hands, get back to work. Quick and painless, like ripping off a Band-Aid. Instead, he got this. Emma's small hand tightened around his, as they stood in the ready position just off to the side of the temporary stage someone had erected near the hangar's main doors. His daughter, his whole world compressed into 4 feet, 11 inches of brown hair, freckles, and a stubborn streak that could give titanium a run for its money, wore her best dress, the navy blue one with a white collar that she'd picked out herself. At 12 years old, she'd already attended more military functions than most career politicians. She knew the drill. Stand straight, smile when appropriate, don't fidget even when your feet hurt in the nice shoes that only come out for occasions like this. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pre-ceremony murmur of conversation. "Why is everyone staring?" "They're not staring, Bug," Jake whispered back, using the nickname he'd given her when she was 3 and had dressed as a ladybug for Halloween. "They're just looking. That's literally what staring is." He suppressed a smile. Smart kid. Too smart for her own good sometimes, which was a trait she'd inherited directly from her mother. The thought of Jessica sent the familiar ache through his chest. Not the sharp, debilitating pain it had been 3 years ago, but a dull, persistent throb that he'd learned to carry the way some people carried old war wounds. Present, manageable, never quite gone. "Lieutenant Morrison," a crisp voice called out from near the stage. "We're ready for you." Jake took a breath and started forward, Emma's hand still in his. She matched his pace perfectly, the way she always did. They practiced this particular dance dozens of times. The military spouse who wasn't a spouse, the dependent who was also somehow the person he depended on most. It was a complicated choreography, and they'd both gotten good at it out of sheer necessity. As they approached the stage, Jake's eyes found the woman standing at the podium, and his stomach performed a complicated maneuver that would have made his flight instructor proud. Rear Admiral Victoria Crane. Of course it was her, because the universe had a sense of humor darker than a submarine at crush depth. Admiral Crane was a legend in the SEAL community, the kind of legend that made new recruits simultaneously inspired and terrified. First female SEAL to reach flag rank. 15 years of operational experience before she'd been kicked upstairs to the administrative side. Holder of more combat decorations than most operators accumulated in entire careers. She was brilliant, ruthless, and possessed approximately zero tolerance for what she publicly called the softening of America's special operations forces. Jake had heard her speak once at a conference in Coronado. She'd spent 90 minutes eviscerating the concept of work-life balance in the SEAL teams, arguing that anyone who needed to balance work and life should consider a different career field, preferably one that didn't involve defending the nation. The speech had been equal parts inspiring and terrifying, like watching a natural disaster in slow motion. You couldn't look away, but you definitely didn't want to be in the blast radius. And now she was here, presiding over his promotion, wearing her dress whites with the kind of precision that suggested she'd been born in them. Her uniform looked like it had been ironed by someone who understood that wrinkles were a personal failing. The ribbons on her chest could have filled a small museum. Her hair, steel gray and cut in a style that suggested she'd given up on fashion around the same time she'd given up on mercy, was pulled back so tight Jake wondered if it was cutting off circulation to her brain. She looked at him the way a wolf might look at a three-legged deer. "Lieutenant Morrison," Admiral Crane said, her voice carrying across the hangar with a warmth of liquid nitrogen being poured directly into your ear canal. "Step forward with your family." The pause before family lasted approximately half a second, but it might as well have been an hour. Jake felt Emma's grip on his hand shift from casual to vice-like. She'd heard it too. That particular inflection that people used when they wanted to say something else entirely, but were constrained by the tedious requirements of basic human decency. Jake had heard that tone before. He'd heard it from commanding officers who suggested, always politely, always with great concern for his well-being, that maybe he should consider a different career path now that he was a single parent. He'd heard it from fellow operators who'd suddenly become unavailable for social events once the invitations shifted from Morrison and Jessica to Morrison and his kid. He'd heard it from well-meaning civilians who'd look at Emma and then at him and say things like, "Wow, that must be so hard," in voices that really meant, "I'm so glad I'm not you." The military, for all its talk of brotherhood and inclusion, still didn't quite know what to do with single fathers in the special operations community. Single mothers got resources, support groups, understanding nods about the challenges of balancing career and family. Single fathers got awkward silences and subtle suggestions that maybe they should find a nice desk job somewhere. Being a widower with a kid wasn't exactly a career accelerator in the SEAL teams. It was more like strapping an anchor to your chest and then wondering why you couldn't keep up during the underwater demolition exercises. They reached the stage, and Jake brought them both to attention with the kind of military precision that was less training and more muscle memory burned into his neural pathways through sheer repetition. Emma stood beside him, her posture perfect, her face composed in that careful neutrality that kids developed when they spent too much time around military formality. Behind them, Jake could feel the eyes of his squadron. Some supportive, some curious, some probably checking their watches and calculating how long this would take before they could escape back to whatever they'd been doing before being voluntold to attend the ceremony. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez caught his eye from the third row and gave him a subtle nod of solidarity. At least someone in the audience was on his side. Rodriguez had been with him on Operation Silent Thunder, had watched the whole thing go down, had testified at the inquiry that followed. Good man. The kind of operator you wanted at your six when everything went sideways. Admiral Crane surveyed the assembled personnel with the expression of someone who'd just been asked to officiate a wedding for two people she actively disliked. She picked up a folder from the podium, opened it with theatrical slowness, and began reading from the citation with all the enthusiasm of someone reading a phone book in a language they didn't speak. "Lieutenant Jacob Morrison," she began, her voice flat enough to qualify as a landing strip. 15 years of service with the United States Navy. Multiple deployments to combat zones including Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, and Iraq. Recipient of the Bronze Star with Valor, the Purple Heart, the Navy Commendation Medal, and various other decorations that I'm sure are very impressive to someone. Jake's jaw tightened. That wasn't how citations were supposed to be read. There was a standard format, a standard tone, a standard level of respect afforded to the achievements being recognized. Admiral Crane was deviating from all of it, and not by accident. Emma's hand had gone sweaty in his. She could sense it too, the wrongness of this moment, the way it was tilting from ceremonial into something else entirely. "Lieutenant Morrison has served with distinction," Admiral Crane continued, her eyes never leaving the paper, as if making eye contact with Jake might contaminate her somehow. "He has demonstrated proficiency in various operational specialties, maintained his security clearances, and fulfilled his duties in a manner that is adequate." Adequate. The word landed in the hangar like a grenade with the pin pulled. Around them, Jake heard the subtle shift of bodies in chairs, the quiet intake of breath from people who recognized an insult even when it was wrapped in military jargon. Admiral Crane finally looked up from the citation, her gaze settling on Jake with all the warmth of an Arctic winter. And Lieutenant Morrison operates under the call sign Iron Ghost, a call sign that, frankly, sounds like something a teenager would come up with while playing video games in their parents' basement. A ripple of nervous laughter spread through some of the junior, enlisted in the back rows. They cut it off quickly when they realized nobody else was laughing. Emma's face flushed red. Jake could feel the humiliation radiating off her in waves. She understood what was happening even if she didn't understand why. Someone was being mean to her dad in front of everyone, and there was nothing she could do about it. Admiral Crane warmed to her theme like a prosecutor who just found the smoking gun. Care to enlighten us, Lieutenant? How exactly does one earn such a creative designation? Let me guess, you were particularly good at hiding during training exercises? Very stealthy? Perhaps you could turn invisible when it was time to volunteer for difficult assignments. The temperature in the hangar seemed to drop several degrees. This wasn't normal. This wasn't protocol. This was a flag officer publicly humiliating a junior officer at his own promotion ceremony, and everyone in the room knew it. Jake felt the old familiar weight settle in his chest. The same weight that had pressed down every time he'd had to explain to another commanding officer why he needed to adjust his deployment schedule. The same weight he carried every time someone looked at him and saw single dad before they saw SEAL operator. The same weight that had crushed him when he'd gotten the call in Yemen. The one that started with "I'm so sorry to inform you," and ended with his entire world collapsing into a black hole of grief and bureaucratic incompetence. Your call sign was your story. It was everything you'd done and survived, compressed into 2 words that your brothers and sisters in arms would carry forward long after you were gone. It was sacred in a community that didn't use that word lightly. And Admiral Crane was mocking his. In front of his daughter. In front of his squadron. In front of everyone who would remember this moment and repeat it. The story spreading through the SEAL community like wildfire. Remember when Admiral Crane absolutely destroyed Morrison at his promotion ceremony? Brutal. Did you hear what she said about his call sign? Jake's mind raced through his options. He could stay silent, take the hit, finish the ceremony, and get Emma out of here. That was the safe play, the smart play, the play that wouldn't create enemies in high places or give Admiral Crane ammunition to derail his career even further than it had already been derailed by circumstance and bureaucracy. Or he could tell her exactly where his call sign came from. He could tell her about Syria. He could tell her about Operation Silent Thunder. He could tell her about the 6 hours that had redefined what it meant to be a ghost and why iron wasn't just an adjective. It was a promise. Emma squeezed his hand 3 times. Their private signal, the one they developed after Jessica died, when words were too hard and touch was the only language that worked. 3 squeezes meant, "I'm here. I've got you. You're not alone." Jake looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw the same stubborn determination that had gotten her mother through chemo when the doctors said there was no point. Saw the same steel spine that had kept Emma functioning when she'd had to pack her own lunch for school because her father was on the other side of the world and her grandparents were doing their best, but they were in their 70s and overwhelmed. Saw the same refusal to be invisible that had defined both the women in his life. He made his decision. "Ma'am," Jake said, his voice cutting through the uncomfortable silence in the hangar. It was the voice he used on operations, calm, clear, absolutely devoid of the rage currently trying to claw its way up his throat. The call sign isn't from training. Admiral Crane raised one eyebrow, her expression suggesting she was prepared to be thoroughly underwhelmed by whatever explanation he was about to offer. "Do tell, Lieutenant. I'm simply fascinated." The sarcasm dripped from her words like acid, eating through whatever thin pretense of professionalism had been maintaining this ceremony. Jake felt the room's attention sharpen. Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair. The other members of his squadron who'd been present for Syria, Thompson, Martinez, Davries, all went very still, recognizing the direction this was about to go. This was the moment. The cliff edge. The point of no return. Jake had spent 3 years being careful. 3 years not making waves. 3 years proving he could be a good operator and a good father, even though the military seemed convinced those were mutually exclusive categories. 3 years was long enough. The call sign is from Syria, ma'am, Jake said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline starting to flood his system. 2019. Operation Silent Thunder. Admiral Crane's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Operation Silent Thunder had been classified when it happened, though most of the details have been declassified since. But it had remained legendary in SEAL circles, the kind of story that got told in quiet conversations over beers, the kind of operation that new guys heard about and assumed was exaggerated. It wasn't. Our team was providing overwatch for a hostage extraction. Jake continued, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond Admiral Crane's shoulder, seeing something the rest of them couldn't. The compound. The rooftops. The way the sun had set over Raqqa and turned the sky the color of blood. 2 aid workers, one American, one Canadian, held by Al-Qaeda affiliates in a compound outside the city. The hangar had gone completely silent. Even the mechanical hum of the HVAC system seemed to have quieted, as if the building itself was listening. Intelligence said there were 12 hostiles. Rules of engagement were clear. Observe only, provide intel for the extraction team. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Jake's voice was flat, factual, the way you recited mission parameters in after-action reports. The intelligence was wrong. There weren't 12 hostiles. There were 40. Admiral Crane's face had gone carefully neutral, the expression of someone rapidly recalculating assumptions they'd made. The extraction team went in anyway, Jake said, because that's what SEALs do. We improvise, we adapt, we overcome, or we die trying. Usually some combination of all 4. A few grim chuckled from the operators in the audience. They knew. They'd all been there, in one form or another. The mission that went sideways, the plan that fell apart on contact, the moment where you had to choose between the rules and your brothers. They got pinned down within the first 30 seconds. Jake continued. His hands, still holding Emma's, had started to shake slightly. She squeezed back, grounding him. Caught in a kill zone in the compound's central courtyard. Taking casualties. Radio traffic was, he paused, searching for words that would convey the sound of men dying without actually saying it in front of his daughter. Concerning. Emma knew enough about her father's work to fill in the blanks. She'd grown up in this world, surrounded by men and women who deployed to places where people tried to kill them. She wasn't naive. The ROE was clear, Jake said, and now there was an edge in his voice, something sharp and dangerous working its way to the surface. Observe. Report. Do not engage. Wait for the quick reaction force to arrive with proper authorization and appropriate force levels. Follow the rules. Stay hidden. Let the chain of command do its job. He finally looked directly at Admiral Crane. I'm sure you're familiar with rules of engagement, ma'am. I'm sure you followed them to the letter throughout your entire distinguished career. I'm sure you've never once looked at a situation and thought that the rules were written by people who weren't there, who didn't have perfect firing solutions on the enemy positions, who didn't have to listen to their teammates dying over the radio while they sat on a rooftop, doing exactly nothing. The challenge in his words was unmistakable. This wasn't insubordination, not quite, but it was dancing right up to the line and waving at it. Chapter 2. Ghosts don't follow orders. Admiral Crane's expression remained frozen, a mask of professional composure that revealed absolutely nothing. But Jake saw it, the tiniest flicker in her eyes, the microscopic tightening around her mouth. She knew where this was going now. She'd read the after-action reports. She knew what Operation Silent Thunder had become. I'm familiar with rules of engagement, Lieutenant, Admiral Crane said, her voice dropping several degrees below freezing. I'm also familiar with the consequences of violating them. Yes, ma'am, Jake replied. I became intimately familiar with those consequences myself. Emma's grip on his hand had progressed from tight to potentially circulation cutting. He could feel her tension radiating through that point of contact, could sense her 12-year-old brain working overtime to process what was happening. Her father was talking back to an admiral, in public, at his own promotion ceremony. This was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and Emma was smart enough to know that those two categories often overlapped. Jake pressed forward, his voice gaining strength as the memory pulled him back to that rooftop, to that impossible choice. I had a perfect position, elevated, concealed, 300 yards from the compound with clear lines of sight to every hostile position. I had a rifle that could put rounds through a quarter at that distance. And I had brothers bleeding out in a courtyard while I sat there and did nothing. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the assembled personnel. ROE doesn't account for what it sounds like when your teammates are dying. Doesn't account for watching the IR signatures on your scope go from movement to stillness. Doesn't account for hearing the desperation in voices you've known for years. Voices that have told jokes and shared stories and trusted you to have their backs when everything went to hell. Rodriguez shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. He'd been on that extraction team. He'd been one of those voices on the radio. So I made a choice, Jake said quietly. I broke position, broke radio silence, broke every rule in the book that was written by people sitting in air-conditioned offices 6,000 miles away from anyone actually trying to kill them. Admiral Crane's hands gripped the edges of the podium, her knuckles going white. Lieutenant Morrison, I'm not sure this is the appropriate venue. With respect, ma'am, you asked. Jake's voice cut through her objection like a blade. You asked about my call sign. You mocked it in front of my daughter, in front of my squadron, in front of everyone here. So I'm telling you where it came from. The hangar was so quiet Jake could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Every eye in the room was locked on the confrontation unfolding on that stage. This was the kind of moment that would be discussed in ready rooms and mess halls for years. The time Morrison went toe-to-toe with Admiral Crane at his own promotion ceremony. I spent the next 6 hours moving through that compound like something out of their worst nightmares. Jake continued, his voice dropping into something dark and distant. One shot, one kill, repositioned before they could figure out where it came from. I became exactly what the ROE was designed to prevent, a ghost. Invisible, untouchable, unstoppable. He could see it again, playing out behind his eyes like a film reel he couldn't shut off. The weight of the rifle, the controlled breathing between shots, the way the enemy had started to panic as their numbers dwindled, their shouted conversations over handheld radios becoming increasingly frantic. 40 hostiles became 30, Jake said, then 20, then 10. They started abandoning positions, shooting at shadows, calling me the Iron Ghost over their radios, a phantom that couldn't be killed, couldn't be caught, wouldn't stop coming. Emma was staring up at him now, her eyes wide. She knew her father was a SEAL. The call sign is from Syria, ma'am, Jake said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline starting to flood his system. 2019. Operation Silent Thunder. Admiral Crane's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Operation Silent Thunder had been classified when it happened, though most of the details have been declassified since. But it had remained legendary in SEAL circles, the kind of story that got told in quiet conversations over beers, the kind of operation that new guys heard about and assumed was exaggerated. It wasn't. Our team was providing overwatch for a hostage extraction. Jay continued, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond Admiral Crane's shoulder, seeing something the rest of them couldn't. The compound, the rooftops, the way the sun had set over Raqqa and turned the sky the color of blood. 2 aid workers, one American, one Canadian, held by Al-Qaeda affiliates in a compound outside the city. The hangar had gone completely silent. Even the mechanical hum of the HVAC system seemed to have quieted, as if the building itself was listening. Intelligence said there were 12 hostiles. Rules of engagement were clear. Observe only. Provide intel for the extraction team. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Jake's voice was flat, factual, the way you recited mission parameters in after-action reports. The intelligence was wrong. There weren't 12 hostiles. There were 40. Admiral Crane's face had gone carefully neutral. the expression of someone rapidly recalculating assumptions they'd made. The extraction team went in anyway, Jake said, because that's what SEALs do. We improvise, we adapt, we overcome. Or we die trying. Usually some combination of all four. A few grim chuckles from the operators in the audience. They knew. They'd all been there, in one form or another. The mission that went sideways, the plan that fell apart on contact, the moment where you had to choose between the rules and your brothers. They got pinned down within the first 30 seconds. Jake continued. His hands, still holding Emma's, had started to shake slightly. She squeezed back, grounding him. Caught in a kill zone in the compound's central courtyard. Taking casualties. Radio traffic was, he paused, searching for words that would convey the sound of men dying without actually saying it in front of his daughter. Concerning. Emma knew enough about her father's work to fill in the blanks. She'd grown up in this world, surrounded by men and women who deployed to places where people tried to kill them. She wasn't naive. The ROE was clear, Jake said, and now there was an edge in his voice, something sharp and dangerous working its way to the surface. Observe. Report. Do not engage. Wait for the quick reaction force to arrive with proper authorization and appropriate force levels. Follow the rules. Stay hidden. Let the chain of command do its job. He finally looked directly at Admiral Crane. I'm sure you're familiar with rules of engagement, ma'am. I'm sure you've followed them to the letter throughout your entire distinguished career. I'm sure you've never once looked at a situation and thought that the rules were written by people who weren't there, who didn't have perfect firing solutions on the enemy positions, who didn't have to listen to their teammates dying over the radio while they sat on a rooftop doing exactly nothing. The challenge in his words was unmistakable. This wasn't insubordination, not quite, but it was dancing right up to the line and waving at it. Admiral Crane's expression remained frozen, a mask of professional composure that revealed absolutely nothing. But Jake saw it. The tiniest flicker in her eyes, the microscopic tightening around her mouth. She knew where this was going now. She'd read the after-action reports. She knew what Operation Silent Thunder had become. I'm familiar with rules of engagement, Lieutenant, Admiral Crane said, her voice dropping several degrees below freezing. I'm also familiar with the consequences of violating them. Yes, ma'am, Jake replied. I became intimately familiar with those consequences myself. Emma's grip on his hand had progressed from tight to potentially circulation cutting. He could feel her tension radiating through that point of contact, could sense her 12-year-old brain working overtime to process what was happening. Her father was talking back to an admiral, in public, at his own promotion ceremony. This was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and Emma was smart enough to know that those two categories often overlapped. Jake pressed forward, his voice gaining strength as the memory pulled him back to that rooftop, to that impossible choice. I had a perfect position, elevated, concealed, 300 yards from the compound with clear lines of sight to every hostile position. I had a rifle that could put rounds through a quarter at that distance. And I had brothers bleeding out in a courtyard while I sat there and did nothing. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the assembled personnel. ROE doesn't account for what it sounds like when your teammates are dying. Doesn't account for watching the IR signatures on your scope go from movement to stillness. Doesn't account for hearing the desperation in voices you've known for years. Voices that have told jokes and shared stories and trusted you to have their backs when everything went to hell. Rodriguez shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. He'd been on that extraction team. He'd been one of those voices on the radio. So I made a choice, Jake said quietly. I broke position, broke radio silence, broke every rule in the book that was written by people sitting in air-conditioned offices 6,000 miles away from anyone actually trying to kill them. Admiral Crane's hands gripped the edges of the podium, her knuckles going white. Lieutenant Morrison, I'm not sure this is the appropriate venue. With respect, ma'am, you asked. Jake's voice cut through her objection like a blade. You asked about my call sign. You mocked it in front of my daughter, in front of my squadron, in front of everyone here. So I'm telling you where it came from. The hangar was so quiet Jake could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Every eye in the room was locked on the confrontation unfolding on that stage. This was the kind of moment that would be discussed in ready rooms and mess halls for years. The time Morrison went toe-to-toe with Admiral Crane at his own promotion ceremony. I spent the next 6 hours moving through that compound like something out of their worst nightmares. Jake continued, his voice dropping into something dark and distant. One shot, one kill, repositioned before they could figure out where it came from. I became exactly what the ROE was designed to prevent. A ghost. Invisible. Untouchable. Unstoppable. He could see it again, playing out behind his eyes like a film reel he couldn't shut off. The weight of the rifle. The controlled breathing between shots. The way the enemy had started to panic as their numbers dwindled, their shouted conversations over handheld radios becoming increasingly frantic. 40 hostiles became 30, Jake said. Then 20. Then 10. They started abandoning positions, shooting at shadows, calling me the Iron Ghost over their radios, a phantom that couldn't be killed, couldn't be caught, wouldn't stop coming. Emma was staring up at him now, her eyes wide. She knew her father was a SEAL. She knew he'd done dangerous things in dangerous places. But hearing the specifics was different. Hearing him describe hunting men through a compound with clinical precision was different. Jake squeezed her hand gently, a reassurance. I'm still your dad. I'm still the guy who makes terrible pancakes and helps with homework. This is just another part of me. By the time the QRF arrived, Jake continued, his eyes finding Rodriguez in the audience. The extraction team was secure. The hostages were safe. And I was facing a court-martial for disobeying direct orders from my commanding officer. A muscle twitched in Admiral Crane's jaw. She knew what came next. They all did, anyone who'd followed the story. The call sign stuck, Jake said. Iron Ghost. Because I'd spent 6 hours being exactly that. Iron Will Ghost Tactics. The court-martial, though, he allowed himself a small, bitter smile. That didn't stick. Turns out the 2 aid workers I wasn't supposed to save had some interesting connections. One was the daughter of a senator from Virginia. The other was the nephew of the Canadian ambassador to the UN. Someone in the back of the hangar let out a low whistle. Political connections could move mountains in the military. They could also make criminal charges disappear like morning fog. Funny how rules of engagement become flexible when politicians' relatives are involved, Jake said, his voice heavy with sarcasm. Suddenly my actions weren't violations of ROE. They were heroic initiative in the face of evolving tactical situations. I got a Bronze Star instead of a court-martial. The Navy held a press conference. Everyone pretended the previous 3 months of legal proceedings had never happened. Admiral Crane's face had transitioned from neutral to something Jake couldn't quite read. Not anger exactly. Not embarrassment. Something more complicated. So that's where Iron Ghost comes from, ma'am, Jake said, his voice hardening. Not for video games. Not from training exercises. From the night, I decided that saving my brothers was more important than following rules written by people who've never had to make that choice. He should have stopped there. Should have left it at the combat story, the heroics, the validation of his call sign. But 3 years of swallowing his anger, 3 years of being careful, 3 years of watching people look at him with pity or dismissal, it all came flooding out. But you want to know the real reason they call me Iron Ghost? Jake's voice dropped to something dangerous. The reason it really stuck? Admiral Crane said nothing, but Jake saw her straighten slightly, preparing for whatever was coming. It's because after my wife died during my deployment, stage for cancer, 3 months from diagnosis to funeral, and I was in Yemen when it happened, I came back to find out that the Navy hadn't processed her death benefits. The words came out flat, matter of fact. But underneath them was a rage that had been building for 3 years. My daughter was living with my parents, wearing clothes from Goodwill, because someone in personnel lost paperwork. Emma's hand trembled in his. They'd never talked about this in detail, about those months right after her mother died when everything fell apart. Jake had shielded her from as much of it as he could. I spent the next year fighting bureaucracy harder than I ever fought the enemy, Jake continued. Fought to get my wife's death benefits processed. Fought to keep my security clearance while raising a daughter alone. fought to stay operational when every 06 in my chain of command suggested I take a nice quiet desk job somewhere. Fought to prove that being a single father didn't make me less of an operator. His voice cracked slightly on that last word, the emotion finally breaking through his military composure. They call me Iron Ghost because I refuse to disappear, Jake said, and now he was looking directly at Admiral Crane, his eyes blazing. Because I refuse to be erased by a system that wants operators to be either superhuman or invisible, with no space for anything in between. Because I'm still here, still serving, still showing up for my daughter, for my team, for my country, even when people like you look at me and see a liability instead of an asset. The silence that followed was absolute. Somewhere in the back of the hangar, someone's phone buzzed. The sound was deafening in the stillness. Jake realized, distantly, that he might have just ended his career. That you couldn't talk to a flag officer like that. Not in public, not ever, regardless of how justified your anger might be. That there were consequences for insubordination, even when you were technically correct. But he also realized he didn't care. Emma squeezed his hand 3 times again. I'm here. I've got you. You're not alone. Admiral Crane stood motionless at the podium, her face a mask that revealed nothing and everything at once. This was the moment where careers ended, where one wrong word could detonate like an IED, where the careful balance between respect and insubordination could tip either way. The entire hangar held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The moment stretched out like taffy, pulling thinner and thinner until Jake was certain it would snap. Admiral Crane's face had gone through several micro-expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, calculation, something that might have been respect, and finally settling on an emotion Jake couldn't quite identify. It wasn't anger, which was what he'd expected. It wasn't pity, which was what he'd feared. It was recognition. The kind of recognition that passed between people who'd both stood at the edge of something terrible and made choices that would haunt them forever. Then Admiral Crane did something that nobody in that hangar expected, least of all Jake Morrison. She stepped down from the podium. The movement was deliberate, precise, each step measured as she descended the 3 stairs and walked across the stage toward Jake and Emma. Every person in the audience leaned forward imperceptibly, sensing that something significant was about to happen, but unable to predict what. Jake's training kicked in automatically. His body tensed, preparing for what? A dressing down? A physical confrontation? Admiral Crane was a SEAL, after all. She'd probably forgotten more about hand-to-hand combat than most operators would ever learn. But she didn't attack. She didn't yell. She came to attention directly in front of Jake, her posture perfect, her eyes locked on his. And then, in a gesture so unprecedented that several people in the audience would later swear they'd hallucinated it, Rear Admiral Victoria Crane rendered a full military salute to Lieutenant Jake Morrison, a flag officer, saluting a junior commissioned officer. It violated every protocol, every custom, every unwritten rule about military hierarchy and proper decorum. Officers of lower rank saluted first. Always. It was carved into the bedrock of military culture, as fundamental as gravity. But here was Admiral Crane, 2 stars on her collar, 25 years of distinguished service behind her, saluting a lieutenant who'd just publicly challenged her in front of his entire squadron. Jake's brain short-circuited for approximately 3 seconds. Then muscle memory took over, and he returned the salute with parade ground precision, his right hand snapping to his brow with the kind of sharpness that came from doing something 10,000 times until it became involuntary. They held the salute for a beat longer than regulation required. 2 warriors, acknowledging each other across the divide of rank and circumstance. Admiral Crane dropped her salute and, in a voice that carried clearly through the stunned silence of the hangar, said, "Lieutenant Commander Morrison, I apologize." Jake felt Emma's grip on his other hand go slack with shock. "I made assumptions about your call sign," Admiral Crane continued, her voice stripped of its earlier sarcasm and mockery. "I made assumptions about your service. I made assumptions about your priorities. I was wrong on all counts." She turned slightly, addressing not just Jake, but Emma as well. And I apologize to you, young lady. Your father is clearly a better SEAL than I gave him credit for. Takes a special kind of courage to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. Emma blinked up at the Admiral, her 12-year-old brain visibly struggling to process this turn of events. Adults didn't usually apologize to kids. Flag officers definitely didn't apologize to the children of junior officers they just humiliated in public. But Admiral Crane wasn't done. She turned to face the assembled personnel, and when she spoke again, her voice had transformed into something else entirely. The voice of a leader who'd learned hard lessons and was willing to share them. "Let me tell you all something about call signs," she began, and the hangars seemed to lean in collectively. The funny ones, the embarrassing ones, those are usually for screw-ups or pranks. Someone crashes a helicopter simulator, they become Crash. Someone gets caught doing something stupid, they get branded with it forever. Those call signs are jokes, and everyone knows it. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the rows of seated personnel. The cool-sounding ones? Those are usually marketing. Guys who pick their own call signs, who try to make themselves sound more impressive than they are. Blade, Shadow, Reaper. Those call signs are ego, and everyone knows that too. Another pause. The HVAC system hummed. Someone coughed quietly. But the ones that make you stop and listen? Admiral Crane's voice dropped lower, more intense. The ones that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up? Those earned. In blood, in sweat, in sacrifice. In choices that nobody should have to make, but someone has to make anyway. She turned back to Jake, and there was something different in her expression now. Something that looked almost like respect. Iron Ghost isn't a video game name, she said. It's not marketing. It's a reminder that the deadliest operators aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes they're the ones who have every reason to quit, but show up anyway. Sometimes they're single parents who do the job better than operators with half the complications and twice the support. Jake felt something shifting in his chest, a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there, suddenly lightening just slightly. Admiral Crane picked up the rank insignia from the small table near the podium, the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant commander. She approached Jake again, and this time her movements were ceremonial, proper, imbued with the respect that should have been there from the beginning. "Your call sign makes me freeze, Commander Morrison," she said quietly as she pinned the new insignia onto his uniform, her fingers precise and steady. "Because it reminds me why I joined the SEALs in the first place. Not for the glory or the prestige or the cool factor, but to serve with people who refuse to quit no matter what. People who look at impossible situations and say, 'Watch me,' instead of 'I can't.'" She finished pinning the insignia and stepped back, her work complete. "Welcome to the rank you've earned 3 times over," Admiral Crane said. And this time when she saluted, it was regulation perfect, appropriate, the acknowledgement of a superior officer to a newly promoted subordinate. Jake returned the salute, and as he did, the assembled personnel erupted into applause. Not the polite, obligatory applause that usually accompanied military ceremonies. Real applause. The kind that started with Rodriguez and the other operators who'd been in Syria and spread through the hangar like wildfire. People were standing now, the junior enlisted first, then the NCOs, then the officers, until everyone was on their feet except Jake and Emma and Admiral Crane. Emma was crying, silent tears streaming down her face, her expression a complicated mixture of relief and pride and residual fear from how close that had come to going disastrously wrong. Jake looked down at his daughter, and something inside him cracked open, not breaking, but opening like a door he kept locked for 3 years, suddenly swinging wide. Did she really just apologize? Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the applause. "Yeah," Jake whispered back, still processing it himself. "Yeah, she did." Admiral Crane was watching them both, and when she spoke again, her voice was pitched for their ears only, barely audible under the continuing applause. "I had a brother," she said quietly, "Navy pilot. Died in a training accident when his kids were young. His wife fell apart. The kids ended up in foster care because there was nobody else, and he hadn't updated his will after his parents passed. The system failed them spectacularly. Jake felt his throat tighten. I spent 5 years fighting to get them back, Admiral Crane continued. Eventually won custody myself. Raised them while maintaining my operational tempo. Every single commanding officer I had suggested I take a desk job. Every single evaluation mentioned my divided loyalties. Every single promotion board questioned whether someone with dependents could really be relied upon for the mission. She met Jake's eyes directly. So when I see someone like you, someone who's not only stayed operational but excelled, I should be celebrating that, not tearing it down. Her voice dropped even lower. I became exactly what I fought against. Someone who forgot that operators are people first, and people are complicated. The applause was finally dying down, people beginning to resume their seats, the moment transitioning from dramatic to normal. Admiral Crane stepped back to the podium, resuming her official role. "This ceremony is concluded," she announced. "Commander Morrison, you're dismissed. Take your daughter for ice cream." "That's an order." The last part got a ripple of laughter from the audience, the tension finally breaking completely. "And Commander?" Admiral Crane added as Jake and Emma turned to leave the stage. "Yes, ma'am. Next time I question someone's call sign, you have my permission to remind me that the scariest ghosts are the ones who refuse to disappear." Jake nodded, unable to trust his voice. As they walked down the hangar toward the exit, hand in hand, personnel from his squadron approached to offer congratulations. Rodriguez pulled him into a bear hug that nearly cracked his ribs. Martinez punched his shoulder with enough force to bruise. DeVries just grinned and said, "That was the most beautiful disaster I've ever witnessed." Emma stayed glued to his side through all of it, basking in reflected glory and probably storing up every detail to tell her friends at school. The ice cream parlor was exactly the kind of aggressively cheerful establishment that made Jake simultaneously grateful and uncomfortable. Bright colors, chirping music, staff members who smiled like their lives depended on it. Emma had picked it specifically because it was the polar opposite of a military ceremony. No uniforms, no protocol, no chance of accidentally insulting a flag officer. They sat in a corner booth, Jake still in his dress whites because he hadn't had time to change, Emma with a sundae that violated several laws of physics with its structural improbability. She'd gotten extra everything, which Jake suspected was her way of processing the emotional whiplash of the past hour. So, Emma sat around a spoonful of chocolate ice cream, hot fudge, and what appeared to be an entire cherry orchard. That was completely insane. "Language," Jake said automatically, though his heart wasn't in it. "Dad, you basically told off an admiral in front of everyone." "I think insane is actually the clinical term for what just happened." She paused mid-bite. "Are you going to get in trouble?" It was a good question. The kind of question Jake had been carefully not thinking about for the past 45 minutes. "I don't know, Bug," he admitted. "What I said wasn't technically insubordination. I didn't refuse an order. I didn't use disrespectful language. I just answered her question very thoroughly." "You made her cry," Emma said matter-of-factly. Jake looked up sharply. She didn't cry. Not on the outside. But on the inside, definitely crying. Emma had an unsettling ability to read people, a skill she developed during the year after her mother died, when she'd had to navigate a world of adults who didn't know what to say to a grieving 9-year-old. She looked like how I felt when Mrs. Henderson at school said I couldn't do advanced math because I'd missed too much class when Mom was sick. Jake remembered that incident, remembered the cold fury that had filled him when Emma came home crying, explaining that her teacher had decided her grief made her less capable. Remembered the extremely professional but deeply uncomfortable conversation he'd had with the principal the next day. Emma had been in advanced math by the end of the week. "The Admiral had a brother," Jake said quietly. "Navy pilot. Died when his kids were young. She ended up raising them." Emma's eyes widened. "She did. Yeah, while staying operational as a SEAL." "Which?" Jake shook his head. "I can barely manage it with one kid and a semi-stable schedule. I can't imagine doing it while running missions." "Is that why she apologized? Because she understood?" "Maybe." Jake pushed his own ice cream around in its dish, creating abstract patterns in the melting vanilla. Or maybe she just realized she was being unfair. Sometimes people don't need a personal connection to recognize they're wrong. Sometimes they just need someone to point it out. By point it out, you mean publicly call them out in front of an entire hangar full of people? I wouldn't recommend it as a general strategy, Jake admitted. But in this specific instance, it seemed appropriate. Emma grinned, the expression so reminiscent of her mother that Jake felt his chest constrict. Jessica had smiled like that, mischievous, proud, slightly concerned, but mostly amused. Mom would have loved that, Emma said softly, as if reading his mind. She always said you were too quiet about your accomplishments, that you let people walk over you because you were trying to be the model operator or whatever. Jake felt the familiar ache. Your mom said a lot of things. Yeah, but she was usually right. Emma took another massive bite of sundae. Like when she said I should learn to advocate for myself, that nobody else was going to fight my battles for me, so I better learn to fight them myself. You were 6 when she said that. It was good advice. I used it when Tommy Morrison, no relation, tried to say girls couldn't play soccer. I told him his opinion was statistically insignificant, and then I scored 3 goals. She paused. Then I got sent to the principal's office for aggressive language, but that's beside the point. Jake laughed despite himself. You're something else, kid. I learned from the best. Emma's voice went softer. Both of you. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the chirpy music washing over them, the sugar-high chaos of other families providing white noise that made their corner booth feel private. Jake's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, expecting a message from Rodriguez or one of the other guys checking in. Instead, it was from a number he didn't recognize. Commander Morrison, this is RADM Crane. I don't typically text junior officers, but these are unusual circumstances. I meant what I said today. You've earned that promotion several times over. Also, I'm putting you forward for a special assignment. Details to follow. It will require single-parent accommodations. I'm making sure those are built into the assignment parameters from the beginning. No more fighting bureaucracy to get what should be standard. VC. Jake stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. What's wrong? Emma asked, picking up on his expression. Nothing's wrong. I think things might actually be right for once. He showed her the phone. Emma read the message, her eyes getting progressively wider. Dad, she's giving you a special assignment. That's good, right? That means she's not mad. That means she's impressed, Jay corrected. Which is, I don't even know what to do with that information. You could start by texting her back instead of just staring at your phone like it's about to explode. Jake typed out a response. Ma'am, thank you. I'm honored. We'll await details. He hit send before he could overthink it. Emma was watching him with that too perceptive expression again. Are you scared? Of what? That it's going to be like before. That you'll take the assignment, and then something will happen, and I'll end up at Grandma and Grandpa's again, wearing Goodwill clothes and pretending I'm okay. The question hit Jake like a physical blow. They talked around this topic dozens of times, but Emma had never voiced it so directly. Bug, Jake said carefully, setting down his spoon and giving her his full attention. What happened after Mom died? That's never happening again. I've got legal documents now. I've got contingency plans. I've got friends who've sworn to take care of you if anything happens to me. You're never going to be lost in the system like that again. But you can't promise you'll come back, Emma said quietly. From deployments, I mean. You can't promise that. No, he couldn't. That was the thing about being a SEAL. You could be the best operator in the world, and random chance could still kill you. Bad intelligence. Equipment failure. Wrong place, wrong time. The universe didn't care how skilled you were. I can't promise that, Jake admitted. But I can promise that I'm going to do everything in my power to come back. And I can promise that you'll be taken care of, no matter what. You're not alone in this, Emma. You've got a whole squadron of uncles who'd go to war for you. I know. Emma's voice was small. Sometimes I get scared that I'm holding you back. That you'd be a better SEAL if you didn't have to worry about me. Jake reached across the table and took her hand, sticky with ice cream residue and all. You want to know a secret? She nodded. You make me a better operator. Not despite the complications, but because of them. Because when I'm out there, I'm not fighting for some abstract concept of freedom or democracy. I'm fighting to make sure you grow up in a world where you can eat ridiculous sundaes in obnoxious ice cream parlors and complain about your dad's career choices. He squeezed her hand gently. You're not holding me back. You're the reason I push forward. Emma's eyes were shiny with tears, but she was smiling. That's really cheesy, Dad. Yeah, well, your mom married me for my charm, not my dialogue. Mom married you because you were hot and made her laugh. Did Grandma tell you that? Grandma has stories, Dad. So many stories. Emma's grin turned wicked. Did you really serenade Mom with Wonderwall outside her dorm window? We're not talking about this. Did you really not know the words and just hum most of it? This conversation is over. Did she really throw a shoe at you? Emma Louise Morrison. Middle name. I'm in trouble. But she was laughing, and Jake was laughing, and for the first time in 3 years, the weight on his chest felt manageable. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Admiral Crane PS. Your daughter has excellent taste in rebellion. Tell her I approve of the advanced math incident. Jake showed Emma the message. Her jaw dropped. How does she know about that? Flag officers know everything, Bug. It's basically their job. That's terrifying. Welcome to my world. They finished their ice cream in comfortable silence. The afternoon sun streaming through the parlor's windows, casting everything in golden light. Jake looked at the new insignia on his uniform, the silver oak leaves that marked him as a lieutenant commander. They felt heavier than they should, but it was a good weight. The weight of recognition, of validation, of finally being seen as the whole person he was, not just the parts that fit neatly into military checkboxes. 3 months after the ceremony, Jake found himself standing in another hangar, this time at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, the birthplace of the SEALs. The Pacific Ocean stretched out beyond the base's boundaries, gray-green water rolling endlessly toward a horizon that promised either adventure or oblivion, depending on your perspective. The special assignment Admiral Crane had mentioned turned out to be a training role, developing and implementing a comprehensive support program for single-parent operators across all special operations forces. It was part policy work, part curriculum development, and part being a living example that you could be both an elite warrior and a present parent. Jake had expected pushback, expected the old guard to see this as softening the teams, as diluting the warrior ethos with domestic concerns. Instead, he'd found a surprising amount of support from people who'd been quietly struggling with the same issues, afraid to speak up because they'd seen what happened to operators who admitted to having complicated lives. Turns out there were a lot of iron ghosts in the SEAL community. They just hadn't had permission to be visible yet. Commander Morrison? Jake turned to find a young lieutenant standing in the hangar entrance, looking nervous and determined in equal measure. She was in her late 20s, fit in the way that SEALs were fit, like she could run forever and then do it again backward. Her name, Tape Red Matthews. That's me, Jake said. You're Lieutenant Matthews? 0900 appointment. Yes, sir. She approached with the careful body language of someone who wasn't sure if they were about to be helped or judged. I wasn't sure if I should come. My command doesn't know I'm here. Jake gestured to a couple of chairs set up near one of the administrative offices. Have a seat. This is an informal conversation. Nothing goes in any official record unless you want it to. Matthews sat, her posture military straight, but her hands fidgeting with the cover she'd removed upon entering the building. I have a 4-year-old son. His father died in a training accident 2 years ago. Army Ranger, parachute malfunction. I've been trying to stay operational, but it's... She trailed off, searching for words. Like fighting a war on 2 fronts, Jake supplied. We're never winning either one completely, and people keep questioning whether you should even be trying. Matthew's eyes went wide. Exactly. How did you write? You've been through this. Still going through it, Jake corrected. My daughter's 12 now, and it doesn't get easier. Just different. Different challenges, different logistics, different flavor of guilt when you miss things. Does the guilt ever go away? Jake considered lying, giving her the answer she probably wanted to hear. But that wasn't what this program was about. It was about truth, even when truth was uncomfortable. No, he said simply. But you learn to carry it better. You learn that being there for 70% of things is better than being there for 0%. You learn that quality matters more than quantity, even though quantity matters too. You learn that your kid is tougher than you think, and more forgiving than you deserve. Matthews blinked rapidly, fighting tears. My son cried this morning when I dropped him off at daycare. He said he wanted me to stay. I have a briefing at 1,000 that I can't miss, so I just left him crying. What kind of mother does that? The kind who's serving her country, Jake said firmly. The kind who's showing her son that women can be warriors. The kind who's making the impossible choice between two important things because there's no good option, only the least bad one. My XO suggested I should consider a different career path. Said special operations wasn't family-friendly and maybe I should think about my son's well-being. Matthew's voice cracked. Like I don't think about his well-being every single second of every single day. Jake felt the familiar anger rising. Different officer, different command, same story. The military talked a good game about supporting families, but when it came to single parents, especially single parents in special operations, the support evaporated faster than water in the desert. What do you want to do? Jake asked. Not what your XO thinks you should do. Not what would be easiest. What do you want? Matthews met his eyes, and Jake saw the same steel he'd seen in Admiral Crane's eyes, in Emma's eyes, in his own mirror. The iron core that didn't bend even when it probably should. I want to stay operational, she said. I want to prove I can do both. I want my son to grow up knowing his mother served with honor, that she didn't quit when things got hard. Then that's what we're going to make happen, Jake said. This program isn't about pushing people out. It's about building systems that let people stay in. I'm going to work with your command to develop accommodations, flexible training schedules, emergency child care protocols, clear policies on deployment cycles, all the things that should have existed from the beginning. And if my command says no, then I escalate to Admiral Crane, who has made it very clear that she considers this a priority initiative. And trust me when I say that you do not want to be the commanding officer who has to explain to Admiral Crane why they're blocking a policy she personally implemented. Matthews laughed, a sound somewhere between relief and disbelief. I heard about your promotion ceremony. The whole community heard about it. You really told her off in front of everyone. I answered her questions thoroughly and honestly, Jake said diplomatically. The fact that my answers made her reconsider her assumptions was a happy accident. There's a recording, Matthews said. Someone filmed it on their phone. It's making the rounds unofficially. You're kind of a legend now. Jake groaned. Please tell me you're joking. Nope. There's even a meme. Picture of you on the stage with Emma. Caption says, when your two goes to be erased. It's actually pretty inspirational. I'm going to need you to never speak of this again. Yes, sir. But Matthews was grinning now, the tension finally breaking. Can I ask you something personal? Shoot. How do you handle the fear? Not a combat. I can handle that. But the fear that something's going to happen to you and your kid will end up alone. Jake took a breath. This was the question that lived in his chest at 2 a.m., the weight that pressed down when he couldn't sleep. The thing he'd talked around with Emma, but never fully confronted. You make preparations, he said slowly. Legal documents. Designated guardians. Financial plans. You do everything in your power to make sure that if the worst happens, your kid is taken care of. And then, he paused, remembering a conversation he'd had with Rodriguez a few weeks ago, after too many beers and too little sleep. And then you accept that you can't control everything. You can't eliminate all risk. You can only make sure that the risk you're taking matters. That it's for something bigger than yourself. Jake leaned forward. Your son is going to remember that his mother served. That she made hard choices. That she didn't quit, even when quitting would have been easier. That's a legacy worth leaving. Matthews nodded slowly, absorbing this. Thank you, sir. This helps more than you know. They talked for another 40 minutes, Jake walking her through the program specifics, the resources available, the network of single-parent operators that was slowly forming across the special operations community. By the time Matthews left, she looked lighter, like someone had removed a pack she'd been carrying for too long. Jake watched her go, then checked his watch. 14:30. Emma would be out of school in an hour. He'd promised to pick her up today, take her to her soccer game, be the dad who showed up in the stands and cheered too loud. His phone rang. Admiral Crane's name flashed on the screen. Commander Morrison, he answered. Commander, how's the program development going? Admiral Crane's voice was all business, but Jake had learned to hear the subtle warmth underneath. Good, ma'am. Just finished a consultation with Lieutenant Matthews. She's going to be a great addition to the support network. Excellent. I'm calling because I have another assignment for you. This one's operational. Jake's pulse quickened. Ma'am, small team, low-footprint reconnaissance mission in East Africa. 3 weeks, maybe 4. You'd be leading a squad of 6 operators. Intel gathering on suspected terrorist financing networks. She paused. I know it's short notice. I know you have Emma to consider. But you're the right person for this mission, and I wanted to offer it to you first. Jake closed his eyes. This was it. The moment where he had to decide what kind of operator he was going to be. The kind who stayed safe in training roles, or the kind who still got his hands dirty in the field. When would we deploy? He asked. 2 weeks from Friday. That's right in the middle of Emma's school musical. She's playing an in of Green Gables. Jake laughed at the absurdity of it. She's been rehearsing for 3 months. I see. Admiral Crane's voice was carefully neutral. And I'm going to have to pass on this one, ma'am. The words came easier than Jake expected. Emma comes first. That's the whole point of the program we're building. That operators shouldn't have to choose between being good at their jobs and being good parents. If I deploy and miss her musical, I'm proving that the system still doesn't work. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Jake held his breath, wondering if he'd just torched his career after all. Then Admiral Crane laughed. Actually laughed. A sound Jake had never heard from her before. Commander Morrison, she said, and her voice was warm, almost proud. That was a test. I'm not sending you to East Africa. The mission's real, but I'm sending Thompson's team. I needed to know if you really believed in what you're building, or if you'd abandon it the first time operational tempo called. Jake felt relief and irritation in equal measure. You tested me? I'm an admiral. It's what we do. She paused. For what it's worth, you passed. Most operators would have jumped at the mission, convinced themselves their kid would understand. You put Emma first. That's the culture shift we need. With respect, ma'am, that's a mind game I could have done without. Noted. Now stop complaining and go pick up your daughter. And Commander? Yes, ma'am. I'm attending the musical. Emma sent me an invitation last week. Apparently your daughter has my personal email address now, which is both impressive and mildly concerning. Jake made a mental note to have a conversation with Emma about boundaries and the proper military chain of command. She's resourceful, he said weakly. She's terrifying. She's going to run the Navy someday. Admiral Crane's tone shifted back to business. I'm bringing some Pentagon brass to the musical. People who control funding for special operations, family support programs. They're going to see a SEAL commander choosing his daughter's performance over a mission. They're going to see that it's possible to be both warrior and parent. That's worth more than any briefing I could give them. After they hung up, Jake sat in the quiet hangar, processing everything. The program was working. Slowly, imperfectly, but working. Single-parent operators were reaching out, sharing stories, finding support. The culture was shifting one conversation at a time. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Dad, Coach says I need to bring snacks for the team on Saturday. Can you make your famous chocolate chip cookies? And by famous, I mean the only thing you can bake without burning. Jake smiled and texted back. Already planning on it. See you at 15:30. That's 3:30 p.m. in normal people time, Dad. I'm aware. I speak both military and civilian. Barely. He headed out of the hangar toward his truck, the California sun warm on his face. As he drove through base traffic toward Emma's school, he thought about the past 3 months, about Lieutenant Matthews and the dozen other operators who'd reached out for support, about Admiral Crane's transformation from antagonist to ally, about Emma, who'd gone from crying at promotion ceremonies to inviting admirals to her school musical, about being seen, really seen, not as a single dad who happened to be an operator or an operator who happened to be a single dad, but as a whole person who was both things simultaneously and completely. The Iron Ghost wasn't hiding anymore. Didn't need to. The system was finally making room for people who refused to fit into neat categories, who insisted on being complicated and human and excellent all at once. Jake pulled into the school parking lot at exactly 15:30, 3:30 p.m. in normal people time, as Emma would say. He saw her immediately, standing with a group of friends near the front entrance, backpack slung over one shoulder, still in her soccer uniform because she'd had practice during lunch. She spotted his truck and waved, said goodbye to her friends, and jogged over with the easy athleticism that reminded him so much of Jessica. "Hey, Bug," Jake said as she climbed in. "How was your day?" "I got an A on my math test, crushed Tommy Morrison, still no relation, in the soccer scrimmage, and Mrs. Chun said my essay about personal heroes was the best in the class." She buckled her seatbelt and grinned at him. "I wrote it about you." Jake's throat tightened. Yeah. I called it the Iron Ghost. How my dad learned to be visible." "Is that too cheesy?" "That's perfect," Jake managed. "I also wrote about Admiral Crane. How she apologized and changed her mind. How that takes more courage than never being wrong in the first place." Emma pulled out her phone. "Oh," and she emailed me back about the musical. "She's bringing colleagues, which I think means important people. So no pressure or anything, but basically my performance might impact military policy." "Emma, what?" "I'm just being resourceful. You and Admiral Crane are building something important. I'm helping by providing real-world examples of why it matters. That's called strategic thinking, Dad. I learned it from you." Jake pulled out of the parking lot, shaking his head in amused disbelief. "You're 12. I'm 12 and tactically sound." She paused. "Can we stop for burgers on the way home? I need fuel for rehearsal tonight." "Sure, Bug. Whatever you need." They drove through late afternoon traffic, talking about Emma's day, about the musical, about the cookies Jake needed to bake for Saturday. Normal conversation, normal life, normal father-daughter time that wasn't normal at all because Jake was a SEAL and Emma was a military kid, and their normal was built on a foundation of deployments and uncertainty and making the most of every moment they had together. But it was their normal, and they'd fought for it, and it was worth every battle. Later that night, after Emma was asleep and the house was quiet, Jake sat at his desk and drafted an email to the growing network of single-parent operators. He wrote about Lieutenant Matthews, about the importance of asking for help, about the culture they were building together. He ended with a quote that Admiral Crane had shared with him, something her brother had told her before he died. "The hardest battles aren't fought with weapons. They're fought with persistence and presence, and refusing to disappear when the world tells you to quit." Jake hit send and watched the email disappear into the network, reaching operators across multiple continents, time zones, branches of service. Each one carrying their own version of the Iron Ghost story. Each one refusing to be erased. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from Rodriguez. "Heard about the East Africa test. Crane's evil genius confirmed. Also heard you chose the musical. Proud of you, brother." Jake smiled and texted back. "Someone's got to show these kids how it's done." "By kids you mean flag officers?" "Exactly." He closed his laptop and headed upstairs, stopping at Emma's door to check on her one last time. She was sprawled across her bed in that boneless way that only sleeping children managed, one arm hanging off the edge, her stuffed ladybug, the one she'd had since she was 3 and should probably have outgrown but hadn't, tucked under her chin. The moonlight through her window cast silver shadows across her face. Jessica's face, reborn in a child who was tougher and braver than either of her parents had ever been. "Love you, Bug," Jake whispered, though she couldn't hear him. "I'm not going anywhere." It was a promise he couldn't guarantee he'd keep. The nature of his work meant that someday he might not come home. But he could promise that Emma will be taken care of, that she'd be surrounded by a squadron of people who loved her, that she'd never be lost in the system again. And he could promise that for as long as he was here, he'd show up. For soccer games and school musicals and cookie baking and math tests. For the quiet moments and the loud ones, the easy days and the impossible ones. That was what it meant to be Iron Ghost. Not disappearing when things got hard. Not hiding behind excuses or regulations or the belief that you had to choose between warrior and parent. It meant being both, completely and unapologetically. It meant refusing to be erased. Jake closed Emma's door softly and headed to his own room, where tomorrow's challenges would be waiting. But tonight he'd won. They'd won. All the Iron Ghosts out there fighting their invisible battles, proving that you could be strong and vulnerable, tough and tender, operational and present. The silver oak leaves on his uniform caught the light as he hung it up for the night. They felt lighter now, almost comfortable. He'd earned them 3 times over, and he'd keep earning them every single day until Emma didn't need him anymore. Or maybe even after that. Because ghosts don't retire. They just change missions. And Jake Morrison's most important mission was sleeping down the hall, dreaming of spotlights and standing ovations and a father who'd moved heaven and earth to be in the audience. He wouldn't miss it for the world.